Well, guys, a lot of y'all seem to like when I tell stories from my past. Things that's happened to me when I was growing up. And I've been thinking about what would be interesting to you all because I like to keep you all interested and I like to keep you all engaged with my channel, obviously. But I also like to tell you stories to get more connected, with you. So I decided to tell you all a story about when I almost died at 4 years old. A lot of the memories are still right here. It's difficult to remember a lot of things when you were 4 years old. And I don't remember a lot of different things, but I remember this quite vividly because it was kind of traumatic. And I think this is one of the reasons that I'm kind of afraid now of getting sick. I'm afraid of going to doctors and things because I'm probably going to find something. Because of this experience here, I think it actually traumatized me, a little bit because I was so young when this happened. But I remember my stomach started hurting really, really bad. I didn't know what it was. I thought it just stomach cramps. And as the minutes went on, it continued to get worse and worse. And I remember my mom, I can't remember if she was at work and came home or she was already there. I don't remember exactly. But I remember my aunt came and got me, and my mom went with me, and we were in the back seat of the car, and my aunt Lorraine was driving the car and took me to Somerset Hospital. And I remember being in the back seat of the car with my mom, and I was in so much pain. I was curled up, in a ball because my stomach was hurting so bad. And no one knew what was going on. They just knew I was in a lot of pain. I was screaming in pain, and I was just doubled over in pain. And she came and got me and took me and my mom to the hospital, actually in Somerset, Kentucky. We were living in Kentucky then. This would have been back in the 1970s, actually. So we went in, and they I don't remember how they decided to do an operation, but they decided to, operate. And right now I have a scar on my stomach that goes to my navel all the way down to, the fun parts. But it goes pretty much all the way down there, so it's all the way up. And I don't know, I can't remember if they opened me up to just find what was wrong or they knew what was wrong through some method. But I remember going into the operating room, and I remember being on the table, and they were rolling me back there to the operating room, and the nurse put a head net on my head to, keep the, I guess, the hair from falling out or something, I don't know. But it put a net on my head, and I remember I didn't like that on there, and I got a hold of that, and I actually took that off and threw that down. And no doubt, they put that on there later. But I remember going back into the room, and I was, like I said, 4 years old, and I was on my back, laying down, and when I looked up, I could see. I remember at least 6 people standing around, and I remember one guy had on glasses, and the other had on the mask, and I was laying there, and I remember, a mask coming over and went over my mouth and my nose, and that's how I remember because I went to sleep, and I woke back up, and I remember being so sore afterwards, and it made me walk up and down the hallway to to keep from getting blood clots and to work out the soreness. But I was so sore that I barely could walk. And my mom stayed with me the whole time. My mom was there beside me the whole time. I couldn't eat for I think 3 days before I could eat anything at the IV. And I remember when they put the IV in, I was throwing a fit. I didn't want the IV in my hand at all. And that nurse, I remember, told me that they had a little girl in there that acted better than me. I remember that. But my mom stayed with me the whole time. And she didn't eat, for 3 days because I couldn't eat for 3 days. Now, you tell me that's not caring about your son, caring about your kid. But I couldn't eat, had an IV, and my mom didn't eat nothing for 3 days because she wasn't going to eat any food, until I did, until I could eat. And what he told my mom was that I had diverticulitis and that one of those had actually ruptured and it was releasing, things from my bowels into my body. And that's why I was hurting, that's why I was so sick. And they said that was extremely rare for someone that age for that to happen. And they took my appendix out too at the same time, so they actually cut out, a part of my colon and put that back together. That's what they said. And my dad, he showed up, I think, one time to check on me. My mom stayed the whole time. She didn't leave my side. She stayed right there beside me, the whole time. There was another kid. I can't remember what was wrong with that kid, but he was in the room with me. They had two beds in the room, and he was in the other bed over here. And I remember they had brought him something, a toy, and I can't remember if it was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was like an Indian headdress type thing with the feathers and things. And the nurses brought that kid there, and I was jealous because I wanted something too. And the nurse brought me a tomahawk. It wasn't a real tomahawk, it was a toy tomahawk. It brought me that toy tomahawk because I wanted, something too because the other kid had something. So I was 4 years old and I wanted something too. And that nurse brought me that, and that was real nice of her. Overall, Somerset Hospital, where was that, Somerset, Kentucky. It, I don't know what it's like now, but back then, they took care of me. I'm still alive today. And the doctor was, I think the doctor, if I'm not mistaken, was Jewish. I think so. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think the doctor was actually Jewish. Dr. Mays, I think that it was his name, if I remember correctly. But it was a horrible experience, and I think that's one of the reasons now that I don't like going to the doctors at all. I get a lot of anxiety because of that experience, because I almost died, because I hurt so bad, and I was in the hospital for a while, 7 days actually. And I remember a lot about that. I remember being having to take showers, and I remember it hurting so bad. I remember walking up and down the hallway with the IV in my hand and just making me walk, and I didn't want to go. I remember my mom being there beside me the whole time, and she wouldn't eat. She would not eat at all because I couldn't eat. I had the IV, and that's the only way I could get any fluids and things and to eat because I'd been cut open and sewed up. So to this day, I really appreciate my mom. I really care about her, and I know she's one of the people that has cured the most in my life, actually, because she was always there and she's proved it. Like I said, my dad, I think, showed up one time for a few minutes, and that was pretty much it, because he didn't want to be disturbed because he, no doubt, was probably out drinking, running around doing this thing like he always done, because that was the most important. That was the most important thing. I love my dad, and everything because of who he was, because he was my dad. But I know how he was, and I knew what he put his what he cared about the most, and that was about himself. Actually, he cared about himself. If he had $20 and it was to take that $20 and buy food for his family, or buy some beer, or a bottle of whiskey or something, he would buy that bottle of beer, bottle of whiskey. If his kid needed, some shoes, which happened quite a bit, cold feet in the wintertime, shoes with the side busted out, wasn't good at all. Had to go to school like that. And if he had any money, he would spend that on himself. he wouldn't spend it on, the family, on my mom, or to pay bills, or, to help the kids or nothing. So that's why I had more respect for my mom than I actually did my dad, because my mom worked her guts out of her life, did everything she could in factories, working like a man to try to make a living. My dad never really worked at a job. Any money he got went for himself, went for his drinking, went for his own pleasure. My mom worked, tried her best, but it's really, really difficult. When I was in the hospital up there, like I said, she stayed with me the whole time. Didn't eat for 3 days, and I appreciate her. I still do today, but that was a horrible experience actually, because I remember hurting so badly, and they cut, my stomach wide open, and I still have a huge scar today where that happened. That took my intestines out, cut part of it out, put that back together. They also took my appendix out, and if I hadn't gotten to the hospital, if I hadn't gotten to the hospital when I did, if my aunt Lorraine hadn't come down there and got me, me and my mom took me to Somerset Hospital. I don't know where my dad was at. I have no idea where he was at. But she came in there and got me, took me to the hospital, me and my mom, and had the operation. If I hadn't done it then, if they'd waited another day, I'd have probably died, because that was ruptured. That diverticulitis was ruptured, and it was releasing bacteria into my body. So I had to be on strong antibiotics. I don't remember that exactly, but that I would have had to be on that. I remember, like I said, going back in the operating room. I remember all the lights around. It was real bright and hurt my eyes. I remember all the doctors around. There were 3 on each side, doctors and nurses and things around each side. One had on glasses, and that one put the mask over my face. I remember, and I was out, and I woke back up, and it was a shock. When you're in the operating room, many of you know that, go in the operating room and then you're out. You wake up in another room. So you can imagine how disturbing that is to a kid, a 4-year-old child. You're wondering what happened. And you look down and your stomach's cut open. And you're sore and you're hurting and you want to get up and you want to go play, but you can't. You got to stay in the bed. And you got to get up and walk down the hallway with the IV in your hand. And when you're in a lot of pain, to a child, it's bad enough for an adult, but for a child, it is traumatic. But that's the time that I almost died. Really, really close. If my mom would have waited another day and thought he'll get better, just a tummy ache, I'd have probably died because of what was going on. But instead, she believed me and got a hold of my aunt on my dad's side, actually. She came down there. We went up there, and I remember, like I said, in the back seat of the car, I was laying there for my mom, and I was in a knot, hurting so bad. But that's the time I almost died. If you have a similar story, leave it in the comments below. Hope you liked the video. Hope you liked this story, this true story from my past. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video, hopefully.